today we have John Tigg with us, who is Senior Vice President of Buyer Development EMEA at Index Exchange. I'm super excited for this one, so let's dive in. And John, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, well, thanks for having me, Gareth, and I hope I can justify your excitement. I will certainly try my hardest as we go through it, but yeah, really happy to be here.
No worries, highly anticipated. So yeah, first question, you've had them before, so you're prepared. If you could just tell us a bit about your business and what you do within the company for those that don't know Index Exchange.
Absolutely. So look, Index Exchange, I think is a pretty well-known name in the AdTech business. We've been around for more or less 20 years. And over the course of that time have always kind of, I guess I would describe it as a very principled company. So kind of if you rewind to the early days of the company, started out as Casale Media, and like many companies that started sort of in the early 2000s, it was an ad network, which then kind of became an exchange as Programmatic kind of started to take off. And has kind of always had sort of three core pillars of its philosophy. So quality, efficiency, and transparency. And, it's kind of, I say those things and I realized how hackneyed some of those phrases have become in ad tech, especially over the last 10 years. But for Index, they are incredibly important. And I can give you some examples of kind of how we've sort of stuck to those principles. We don't, for example, work through any third parties or aggregators. We work direct to publisher only. And that's for a number of reasons. We have always believed that, adding fees to the supply chain by working through third parties is not a good idea. It doesn't provide good value to advertisers or indeed to publishers. And it also ultimately means that if you're an advertiser, there's no way you can know where your ad is running if you're not working directly with an SSP that's direct to publisher. So that's just an incredibly important foundational principle if you want to kind of thrive in this space, and it has been something that's very important to us. On the efficiency side, Andrew Casale, our CEO, his philosophy is very much that the ad tech is not the story. We should be trying to get out of the way and allow other companies to bring their unique value to the ecosystem and to be able to profit from those. And so our role as an exchange is to create the most efficient path to the supply for an advertiser, for an agency, or for a third party that wants to use our infrastructure to sell their unique products, be it kind of a data company, be it a format company, or something else. And so, our role therefore is to be cheap, is to be efficient, is to provide the fluidity and flexibility of those pipes so that people can come and do that and know that they're going to be able to do that in the most efficient way possible. And so that's an incredibly important part of what we do. And then transparency. And this is obviously, a phrase that has become more and more important, particularly recently, in light of, everything from, MFA, which has obviously become a huge problem in ad tech over the last kind of, I'd say 2 to 3 years in particular. But also kind of, some of the reports we've seen about programmatic advertising ending up on, CSAM material and other kinds of extremely objectionable and indeed disturbing content. For us, that's not okay. And we want to ensure that we are never in any of those reports. And so we are completely transparent with our customers around every ad that we run on our exchange, where it ran, when it ran, and everything that was associated to it, including the prices and the fees that were taken in the supply chain at the time. And I think only by doing that can you be kind of truly transparent. And, if you rewind 10 years, people were talking about transparency, but really not doing it. Whereas Index has kind of always taken this position. And I think, fast forward to now, with all of those things that I just mentioned, it's incredibly important to be able to provide that to your customers, whether they be publishers, which are ultimately our customer. We get paid by the publisher, and that's the only person that ever pays us. Or indeed, if you're an advertiser, which is obviously another customer of ours at the other end of the supply chain, who needs to know where their ads are being shown and needs that level of control. And so we found that by sticking to those principles over that time, it probably cost us a lot of money 10 years ago being as principled as that. But now it's become extremely important. And because we've always been so consistent, that's our position. I think that's meant that we're regarded as a trusted partner, which is obviously crucially important. So that's just like a little bit, I guess, of the background of Index, some of, I guess, the guiding principles around who we are, and I'll very much kind of continue to be who we are today. So yeah, that's kind of like a brief overview of Index.
Yeah, fabulous. I guess there's a bit of an inherent trade-off. Trying to be sort of the plumbing, but then also
Yeah,
trying to provide that brand safety. Because there's an argument to be made that, well, we're just the plumbing. We just connect buyers and sellers. That's what we do. It's kind of on
yeah.
the buyers to provide that brand safety, but actually, you guys are stepping in and making sure that you're providing sort of that brand safe layer as well, which obviously then buyers can add additional. Checks and balances on top of.
Totally. I mean, look, my perspective on that is that absolutely everybody in the ecosystem that plays a role in the programmatic supply chain has a responsibility to brand safety. And our role, what we can do, is provide direct pipes to high quality publishers that we can demonstrably show are what we say they are. And if we do that, then I feel like we're playing a big part in ensuring that not just that ads aren't reaching the kinds of content they shouldn't be reaching, but that they are reaching places that they should. And by that I mean high quality journalism. I mean broadcast television that's being broadcast over digital pipes. And these things are kind of a daily thing for us. We have a huge team of people constantly looking at the quality on our exchange and making sometimes very tough decisions around the kind of supply that we're prepared to work with, because we're extremely strict about it. But only by being that way can we ensure that we're providing the quality to our advertiser partners that we say we are. And so everybody has a role to play.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I've had a meeting with a client where brand safety hasn't come up. In 15 years in programmatic, it's always a concern of theirs, and it's great that Index
Yeah.
are sort of helping buyers to ensure that it's brand safe inventory. So just in terms of the key features you outlined, I don't know if there's any more that you've got, but what are some key features that make Index stand out above kind of other exchanges? I know you've mentioned quite a bit,
Yeah.
but if there's any more.
Yeah, so look, I obviously talk quite a lot about kind of the guiding principles of our exchange, and they really do form kind of part of I guess, our differentiation. Look, one of the others is, and kind of touching a little bit on where we find ourselves today is around curation. We've taken a very, I would say, pioneering approach to curation, and part of that is all about, providing, obviously direct supply, enabling our customers to bring their unique value through data, through formats, through the best content. But it's also about not adding fees to the supply chain that make that less efficient. And so one of the things that one of I guess the Index promises is that we will never charge you for use of our curation tools or platform, because we feel that, again, our role is to provide the tools, to provide the infrastructure, and for other businesses to come in and add value. And look, that could be everything from advertising agencies that want to get more control over their supply and be able to make the promise in pitches to their clients that they know exactly where their ads are being shown and that they can show them. It's data businesses who want to couple their unique data with clean, high quality supply, and then sell that to advertisers and agencies. Or indeed, it could be publishers who want to package their supply in different ways, and provide their own data, their own unique value, and push that to their own customers. And so again, Index's role is very much about being the infrastructure that allows them to do that, and do that in the most efficient way possible. And so those principles kind of permeate everything that we're doing. I think, if I was to think about how, where we're innovating, where we're really investing right now. I mean, obviously, curation is a huge thing. It's not going to come as any surprise that connected TV has been a massive area of investment for us over the last probably 3 or 4 years, and we've grown substantially during that period. But for us, we think that programmatic has kind of like as a method of buying advertising is kind of at a bit of a pivotal moment, and it's driven by a few forces. So first of all, I think brands are genuinely starting to lean into programmatic now, and they are asking tough questions, not just of their agencies, but also of companies like us, and also their DSPs, about what are they being charged, and how much of what they're being charged is the cost price of the asset, whether it be kind of a data point or whether it be a format or measurement object, and how much of that is margin. And then they also all of the stuff around the supply that they're using. And I think so there's kind of brands leaning in. I think there's a lot of pressure also in the DSP space. So look at kind of Amazon, a business that we see growing rapidly in the space, and really starting to challenge the incumbents like DV360 and of course the Trade Desk. Still the kind of biggest players, but certainly that's starting to drive some change, and also put a spotlight on what's going on the DSP side. And I guess kind of, if you look at how programmatic has worked for the last 15, 20 years, a lot of the value has been kind of done in the DSP. So measurement, frequency, creative, targeting, all of this value has been built into the DSP, and it kind of like makes sense, right? That's where you kind of build a campaign. That's where the campaign starts. And I think our perspective is that that's not actually the case. Where it starts is a bid request being sent to a DSP, and they then evaluate that request. Now, I think that we feel that, compute has got to a stage now where you can actually start to make decisions before a bid request is ever sent to a DSP. So we can see a lot of data on every request that we see in our SSP today. We see publisher data, we see obviously all the signals from the page, and we've obviously got a lot of historical knowledge about how certain impressions perform. And so to some extent, we can do that decisioning before the request is sent to the DSP. Then we're sending more intelligent requests to a DSP. They then have to process less requests, which is a huge cost for them. And we think that that will ultimately drive a better outcome for everyone. Publishers will get more targeted impressions at a higher value. DSPs will have to process less impressions because they're already being decisioned before they're ever sent to them. And it's all can be done much faster. So today, the whole programmatic sort of, I guess, chain from, a device sending an ad server an opportunity, that then being sent to the SSP then effectively asks DSPs to bid, it runs an auction, and then it sends back the winning bid all the way back through the ad server to the device, that doesn't matter whether it's a phone, whether it's a CTV, whether it's just, the laptop that we're talking on right now. That whole process takes about 200 milliseconds. I mean, that literally is the blink of an eye. We think that process can be done in less than 10 milliseconds. If you do it before a bid request is ever sent. Now, why does that matter? It's kind of very abstract in a way. Well, it matters because in the 200 milliseconds that it takes for the process to be completed right now, you get a lot of lost bids, you get bad creatives, you get DSP timeouts, and these things are ultimately bad because it's less revenue to the publisher, less opportunity to the advertiser. And at the end of the day, as an SSP, we see the entire internet. And so what does that mean? That means we see a huge amount of data. We're processing 500 billion auctions a day globally, which translates to about 2 petabytes of data. So, what the hell is 2 petabytes of data? So to kind of give that I guess to kind of create an anecdote out of it, if you were to stream Netflix in HD for 85 years straight, that's 2 petabytes of data. So it's an enormous amount of data. It's 400 billion pages of text, which is more books than have ever been written or published ever, hundreds of times over. So we're seeing that every day. And obviously we can do a lot with that data. And so we think that, there is an evolution taking place where there's a new pocket of innovation that can be created. And I think it's a really exciting time to be in the space because there's so much opportunity.
Can I say, as a bit of a geek, that does sound pretty cool. All the data you guys are processing, and it's interesting that you're saying how you can reduce the obviously the time between an impression or bid request and the auction happening, because it reminds me sort of high frequency trading, where it literally, in the city, people are moving closer to the exchange to try and get that edge in terms of actually seeing the data first. And it's about optimizing it, isn't it? And obviously there's a point where it becomes diminishing returns, but I think it's very interesting that there's definitely room for improvement in the ecosystem as it stands.
I think there can't be a downside to getting closer to the impression, the asset. So in the example that you just gave, the asset is obviously a stock, a share, a commodity. In our world, that's an ad impression, and you want to be as close as possible to the ad impression so that you can gather all the data, all of the signals, and use those signals to define a decision that you want to make. And you want to do that as quickly as possible. Speed is extremely important. And yeah, like I said, I think, we call it sell side decisioning. So it's making that decision before the bid request is ever sent to a DSP can have enormous benefit for all participants in the ecosystem. And it should ultimately bring the cost down also. So we're excited about it. We're already doing this with a number of customers, and we're seeing some very encouraging results. So I think it's a very exciting time to be part of this.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I think it's just because I think we've probably covered it off a lot, but in terms of you guys are a company at the forefront of AdTech, so I think you've kind of outlined how you're driving innovation. But in terms of AI, which is like the big topic now, obviously it's the thing everybody's talking about. How do you think that AI is going to change the media industry over the next few years?
Yeah, look, I think obviously this is a huge topic. But to kind of give it some context, I think that obviously tremendously exciting. You kind of, I look back at my own career, and there was kind of the digitization of advertising, which drove the kind of big boom. So, massive investment going into digital, everything from search to display, and then more recently, obviously, into things like CTV. You then kind of had the dawn of programmatic, which kind of automated the process of doing that, which itself created a huge boom in investment. And then you had sort of more tactical things within that, like header bidding, which kind of like played a big role in kind of, I guess, democratizing impressions to some extent. But yeah, certainly played a big role in driving scale. And then kind of, I feel like you kind of had a bit of a gap, and it was I kept thinking, what's going to fill this gap? And first of all, it was sort of addressable TV. Is that going to be the next big thing? And that took a little bit of time to kind of percolate and turn into the sort of product that we see today, which is very much still in development. I think it's really early there. You then had things like the metaverse, which can you even believe that was considered to be kind of the next big step, and that kind of
and the amount that Meta spent on it as well, right? They spent so
just
much on
bonkers. I mean, I'll tell you a story. So I went to a conference. I guess you would describe it as an executive kind of offsite or whatever, in California a couple of years ago. And kind of you go to this event, and there's obviously lots of big and interesting people there. But it's run in a slightly different way. So you turn up to the event, and there's this huge, great whiteboard, and you can write on it in each of the scheduled slots a subject that you'd like to talk about. And so you go up to the board, and I did it, and you kind of write a subject you want to talk about, and then people can decide whether or not they want to come to your subject. It's a bit anxiety ridden when you're trying to figure out if any of these very important people are interested in anything you have to say. But I mean, look, the very obvious thing about it was that almost every talk was about AI, and this was 2 years ago. And I went up to the organizer and said, does it sort of concern you that everyone's kind of talking about things that are either heavily overlapping or basically the same thing? And actually, she said to me, what's fascinating is that if you rolled back sort of a year previous, so 3 years ago, almost every talk was about the metaverse, and nobody's talking about it now. And I thought that was a fascinating piece of insight. And so, to kind of get back to your question, AI is the next big boom, and we're already in it. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the different ways in which AI is starting to be applied across our industry. And there are obviously going to be some things that you think are going to be huge, and then they don't turn into anything. And then there are going to be some things that you just are totally unaware of that turn into massive deals. And I think for us, there's really kind of a couple of things. So I think we see AI right now as an exchange, as a way to make our business operate more effectively. So we're looking at various different ways in which we can use things like neural networks to make better decisions on how, I don't know, our servers respond when we're running auctions, and how we can be more efficient in that sense. And so, to some degree, I would argue that the best uses of AI are actually kind of in the boring corners of kind of the back office, trying to work out how to make companies more efficient. And I think there are so many use cases there that many companies are working on right now, that will make companies a heck of a lot more efficient, and therefore allow them to invest what they save in being more strategic and driving innovation. And so I think, so for us, that's very much where we are. I think the other side of it is how we can help businesses in AI to provide better products on the front end. And so, if you kind of, I'll make a kind of a generalization here, but the fundamental thing that you need for any AI model, whether it's kind of machine learning that's been in the industry forever, or whether it's something that's kind of building new creatives, is a high volume of very high quality, consistent data signals. And if you look at an exchange, and again, I already mentioned the amount of data that we're generating on every single day, you'd say, okay, there's something really interesting there. How can we, as an exchange, help AI businesses to basically train the best models that they can based on the best quality data, and then for that to then be applied to media spend? And so, we're working with a number of partners right now to help them do just that, to help them use our infrastructure to train their models for things like custom algorithmic bidding, for example. And there are a few companies doing that already with us, and we're seeing some pretty amazing results. And so I think our role in that sense right now is to work with companies, again, who are bringing this kind of unique value and investing heavily in AI, by kind of giving them access to signal, and by doing that, we can help them deliver better results for their customers, which is ultimately going to be good for us, because it's going to drive more media spend to our publisher partners, who are our customers at the end of the day. And so, what have we seen so far? We've seen this working really well. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it. And I think, my role is really about looking after advertisers and agencies. And, we see them leaning in heavily here. And I think that it's very obvious to them that this is the next big thing, which is going to drive efficiency for their business, but it's also going to drive better results for their customers. And so, yeah, we're kind of all in that sense.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, I think it was really interesting. You mentioned sort of everybody was talking about. I think Jeff Bezos said that AI is going to be sort of the horizontal layer, and so there really isn't a business that couldn't be talking about it right now. There's almost no businesses that can be applying it in some sense to their own business. And I think what you mentioned there about providing your data to custom algorithms is a super smart application of the potential that you guys have within your business to put it into AI. Yeah, it's very great, very
Absolutely.
good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, look, I should sort of caveat by saying we're obviously extremely careful about which data we share.
Yeah,
But look, it's really interesting. And yeah, I think that this area is going to move incredibly quickly.
definitely. So apart from that, I guess, do you have any other ways you're implementing AI in your business at the moment, and maybe in the business directly to improve operations? You've already kind of mentioned a bit of that, but also for clients that you mentioned a bit of that. But have you got any other examples, and are you seeing good results from it?
I mean, I think I probably those are the biggest examples that we'd see today, that kind of have tangible kind of outcomes. I mean, look, like every business, we're looking at ways in which we can we can use AI to make us more efficient, to make us work better, to deliver better results. We're testing a lot, but not everything is a success. So yeah, I think we're in the same place as a lot of companies in that way. And we'll start to see some really interesting use cases over the next kind of 12 months or so.
Yeah, I guess as with any new technology, it's a case of testing and learning, and not every time you try and apply it is going to be useful or successful.
That's right.
Yeah, very good, very good. So, outside of AI, are there any other trends that you're seeing in the space that maybe clients should be aware of?
Well, look, curation is obviously a big deal. And I think it's sort of fascinating when you look at all the different participants in that. And, when I think about curation, I sort of think of it as SPO 2.0. So supply path optimization is something that kind of, I guess, has gripped it's certainly the exchange part of the industry over the last sort of 5 years or so. And really, it's been driven by this need for advertisers and agencies to understand with much more granularity where their ads are showing, and make sure that they're doing it in the most direct manner possible, and that they get transparency on all the fees that are being taken out of the supply chain, in the process of kind of I guess the programmatic ecosystem. So curation is kind of building on that, and it's like, well, okay, now we know where ads are showing. What else can we do? Can we build products on this supply to deliver packages of media and data that drive a specific outcome? And that can be anything from, I don't know, viewability and video completion rate all the way through to lower funnel outcomes. And we're seeing customers now start to really innovate on those pipes, having kind of spent 12, 18 months in a kind of a curated supply environment, and look at different ways in which they can bring kind of different assets together, to create media products. And you mentioned it earlier. It's starting to look kind of in some senses similar to the sorts of financial products that you see businesses bring to commodities and assets and stocks and shares. It's becoming much more sophisticated, and it's something that we're very invested in. We've probably got about certainly kind of 100 to 120 businesses now, curating on our platform, bringing their own data, bringing their unique value. And that's everything from, audience data businesses all the way through to custom algorithmic partners who are using AI models. And so it's a really fascinating time. And yeah, that's definitely an area where we're investing heavily, and we're seeing a lot of innovation.
Very cool, very cool. And in terms of this year and beyond, is there anything major that's coming up for you guys?
Well, look, I think we mentioned earlier. I think the big area for us is in sell side decisioning. So how can we continue to make the programmatic supply chain work better for our customers? How can we help them to reduce the cost associated with programmatic, so that ultimately that delivers more working media for advertisers and more revenue to publishers? It's really simple. But obviously the execution of that is extremely complex. But yeah, look, we think that there is this new opportunity where you can make those decisions, excuse me, before an ad request is ever sent to a DSP. And if that gets done in the right way, it's going to change the face of programmatic, and we're extremely excited about it.
Yep. Definitely sounds interesting. As somebody on the other side of that, it's something I think we'll be exploring. So, in terms of just rounding off the interview, we've finished with some quick fire questions. So, who's your favourite brand in the media / ad tech space apart from your business? Obviously.
Yeah, I had to have a think about this one, and obviously, very personal choice here. But I think back to my formative years in the digital space. I spent 5 years at Yahoo. Some of the best times that I've had, an absolutely incredible team, and obviously, we were working. I was working there during a time when digital was exploding. So I have incredibly fond memories of working there, and so I would say that Yahoo probably gets my vote. It's a totally nostalgic vote, but I do not apologize for that.
I was going to say that's a bit old school, but still, very good, very good. And an individual in the space you'd like to give a shout out to, and why?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a think about this one. But I think, if there's one person that I would give a shout out to, it would be Matt White. So Matt is a guy that's been in and around the industry for a long time. Worked at Channel 4, but he was my boss when I was at Yahoo. And a lot of what he taught me as a manager have kind of acted as sort of guiding principles of how I sort of conduct myself and how I manage. And so he taught me a hell of a lot. And lessons that I carry with me today. He's also a very good friend of mine still, and so yeah, I would give it a big shout out to Matt. So yeah, that's my choice.
Awesome. A good shout out to Matt at Channel 4 there. And the number one lesson you've learned since starting in the industry, then, if you
The
could pick one.
number one lesson. So this is a tough one. I mean, look, uh, it seems like a very broad thing to say, but things change. And I realize that we talk about how, the only constant is change and all of those kind of hackneyed phrases. But the reality is that, if you look at just programmatic as a whole, for 15 years, it's felt like not that much has changed. DV360 and the trade desk, absolutely dominant. Facebook and the other walled gardens just seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But just look at what's happening now. Search is starting to be disrupted by AI and people like ChatGPT. It seemed like Google had an absolute monopoly on that for such a long time. We're seeing disruption in the DSP space, not least by the DOJ case that Google are going through right now. But also, people like Amazon coming to market incredibly aggressively. And so, you've got to be very resilient, because there have definitely been times over the years when I've just thought, I don't know if you can win. But look, you got to stick at it. You got to be resilient. You got to stay true to your principles, because things do change, and we're seeing that happen right now. So that'd be my kind of big lesson, I guess.
Definitely, yeah. It's a bit of a sort of. It seems like a bit of a juxtaposition in the industry. Like you say, some things seem to never change and have been the same for, like you say, the last 10, 15 years the industry's been around. And then, some things just constantly evolving and changing. And yeah, like you say, the biggest disruptor right now does seem to be potentially Google there, doesn't it? I mean, with
Yeah,
AI coming into that space. So, John, very interesting. Some really great insights for our listeners there. So, yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
absolute pleasure. Thank you, Gareth.